My name is Jordan Whitaker. I'm 34 years old, and for most of my life, I was the invisible one. The quiet one. The helper. The one no one really asked about but always expected to show up, smile politely, and fade into the background like a piece of neutral furniture. That night, I was doing exactly that. Sitting quietly near the patio lights at my sister Heather's backyard birthday dinner for our mom, sipping water from a plastic cup and trying not to draw attention. The kind of laughter echoing around me felt too familiar, sharp, exaggerated, loud enough to sting. Heather was in her element again, retelling some old childhood story where I, as always, was the punchline. And then Jordan spilled apple juice all over her teacher's suede shoes. Heather laughed, flipping her perfect hair. She cried for hours like the apocalypse hit our third-grade classroom. The table roared. My mom dabbed at her eyes from laughing so hard. My dad chuckled and added his classic line, "That sounds like our Jordan." Always a little dramatic. I didn't say anything. I didn't even look up. I'd been here before. Dozens of times. This wasn't new. But what came next was cutting through the air like a gust of wind that didn't belong. A small voice broke the rhythm. But she flies the jet. The words came from Ryan, Heather's 10-year-old son, who was sitting on the grass with a half-eaten popsicle, blinking at the grown-ups like he'd just stated a plain fact. Which to him, he had. Silence. Forks froze mid-air. Someone coughed and didn't finish the sound. Heather blinked, then narrowed her eyes, her smile twitching. "What did you say, sweetie?" Ryan turned to her, totally unfazed. "Aunt Jordan flies jets. She showed me. She wears the big headset and everything." I didn't move. I didn't nod. I didn't smile. I just took another sip of water and let it land. Because the truth doesn't need a microphone. Sometimes it only needs to be spoken by someone who hasn't learned to doubt it yet. And in that moment, the room, or rather, the backyard full of curated string lights, catered charcuterie boards, and performative small talk shifted. You could feel it. People didn't know what to say. Heather stared at her son like he'd dropped an F-bomb at the Thanksgiving table. They all looked at me like I'd been hiding something scandalous. But I wasn't hiding. They'd just never thought to ask. Growing up, I used to think Heather had some kind of spotlight sewn into her skin. She was born blonde, loud, and magnetic. Every word she spoke landed like it had glitter on it. She didn't just enter a room, she took it. Even as kids, she knew exactly how to make people laugh, how to make teachers forget the homework she didn't do, how to turn every scolding into a funny anecdote with her at the center. And me, I was the other one. The one with brown hair and glasses too big for my face. The one who read chapter books on the swings during recess. The one who memorized the bus routes and made sure our forms were signed and our lunches packed. If Heather was the fireworks, I was the night sky they disappeared into. It started small little things that only kids pick up on but remember forever. At family events, if I brought home a good grade, Heather had a bigger story. If I performed a piano piece at school, Heather danced barefoot at Grandma's on Christmas Eve. And somehow the adults framed it all like it was meant to be. "She's got the sparkle," Dad would say, his eyes glowing with pride after one of her performances. "You're more grounded," Mom would add to me, handing me the dish towel like that was supposed to be comforting. Grounded. That word clung to me like lint. It meant safe, boring, unremarkable. It meant my feet were on the ground because no one ever gave me permission to take off. At first, I tried harder. I joined the science fair. I ran for class secretary. I even cut my hair short once, thinking maybe a new me would be harder to ignore. But no matter what I did, Heather always showed up brighter, louder, more something. Eventually, I stopped trying. I figured if I couldn't win at being seen, I'd win at being invisible. And you know what happens when you stay silent long enough. People think that silence defines you. By high school, Heather was prom queen. Her senior quote was some inspirational Taylor Swift lyric. I was working part-time in the school library, saving every dollar I could. Not for clothes or prom tickets. For flight lessons. It's wild, I know. Not exactly what you'd expect from quiet, grounded Jordan. But I'd gotten obsessed after a class field trip to the local airfield. Watching those planes take off, it was like a door cracked open in a world I thought had no exits. I couldn't explain it. I just knew. Up there, no one was talking over me. Up there, no one expected me to smile and make room for someone else's story. And I didn't tell anyone, not even my parents. I'd seen what happened when I showed them my passions. Either it got overshadowed or turned into a joke. So I kept this one close, sacred. While Heather bragged at family dinners about her latest internship or her high school boyfriend making varsity, I was watching YouTube tutorials on crosswinds and memorizing FAA regulations. I got my acceptance letter to aviation school senior year and opened it alone in my car in the post office parking lot. I remember holding that envelope to my chest, eyes stinging. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time in my life I'd carved out something that didn't belong to Heather. Something she couldn't twist or narrate or take away. It was mine. I left home at 18 with nothing but a duffel bag, a used MacBook, and a paper folder full of flight school paperwork. I didn't leave in a blaze of teenage rebellion. There was no screaming match, no slamming of doors, no declarations of, "You'll miss me when I'm gone." That wasn't my style. I just faded out the way I always had. I packed, I hugged them goodbye, and I got on a bus. No one asked where I was really headed. I told them I'd gotten a job at the airport and planned to figure it out from there. They nodded, distracted Heather already launching into some story about an audition she was preparing for in LA. Mom hugged me, but didn't ask for details. Dad gave me $40 and said, "Don't forget to eat something that isn't ramen." And that was it. I trained in Nevada under skies so wide and empty they made you feel microscopic in the best possible way. The flight school was intense, cutthroat even. You couldn't coast. Everyone there had something to prove, and I was no different. I juggled coursework with 2 part-time jobs, baggage handler during the day, aircraft hangar cleaner at night. I lived off black coffee, peanut butter sandwiches, and adrenaline. But I didn't complain. Because for the first time in my life, I was building something of my own. I wasn't the background anymore. I was the one holding the yoke, pushing forward through headwinds and crosscurrents, learning how to trust myself when the cockpit got quiet, and all you could hear was wind and instinct. I still didn't tell my family. Every few months, I'd text Mom a photo of a plane wing from the tarmac and say, "Still working at the airport. Things are good." She'd reply with a thumbs up, or, "Stay safe," like I was a temp behind a check-in desk. That suited me just fine. The more they assumed, the easier it was to fly under the radar. No pressure, no opinions, no judgment. By 26, I had my commercial pilot's license. By 30, I was flying chartered Gulfstreams for a private aviation company that catered to CEOs, athletes, and old money types with last names that could buy towns. My flight logs had stamps from places I used to dream about: Monaco, Cape Town, Osaka, Lisbon. Sometimes I'd see news stories or Instagram posts about my passengers, and I'd laugh quietly to myself. These were people who moved markets and shaped elections, and they trusted me to get them from point A to point B safely. And still my family had no idea. At Christmas, Heather once asked between bites of lemon tart and humble brags about her husband's new Porsche. So like, "Do you scan tickets or load baggage?" And I just smiled and said, "Something like that." She didn't even wait for a follow-up. Honestly, it was easier this way. I'd stop trying to explain things they never wanted to understand. My job didn't come with a business card they'd recognize, and trying to impress people who hadn't clapped for you since 3rd grade, it's exhausting. So I let them think whatever they wanted. Because truthfully, the longer they underestimated me, the higher I climbed. And I liked it better at altitude. I didn't plan to take Ryan with me that weekend. Heather and her husband had booked a last-minute couples cruise out of Miami, and my mom, who usually babysat, had thrown out her back, lifting some overambitious ceramic planter. That left me. Just a couple nights, Heather said breezily over the phone, like she was asking me to water her plants. "He's low maintenance. You barely have to do anything." I almost said no. Not because I didn't want to spend time with Ryan, he was the only member of the family who didn't talk at me, but to me, but because I had a long flight schedule and very little time off. Still, something about the way she dismissed it so casually got under my skin. Like my time didn't matter. Like I was still the background character to be summoned when needed. So I said yes. I cleared my Saturday, pushed my scheduled simulator hours to next week, and picked him up with a backpack full of action figures and zero expectations. That night, after pizza and a short giggly attempt at watching a scary cartoon, Ryan saw the framed photo on my bookshelf. It wasn't in a frame like you'd see on Instagram, just a plain black border around a picture of me, in full pilot uniform, standing beside a sleek white Gulfstream G600. He pointed at it. "You fly that?" I hesitated. Then I nodded. "Every week." His eyes widened. "No way." I smiled. "Wanna see?" The next morning, I took him to the private hangar. It wasn't a tour. It wasn't even something I planned to do. It just felt right. Like someone finally asked the right question and I couldn't not answer. I let him sit in the captain's chair of a training simulator first, showed him the basic dials and switches, how the throttle worked, what the radio sounded like. Then I pulled out my headset, the real one with my initials engraved on the side, and slid it over his ears. He looked up at me, eyes huge. "You really fly these?" "Yup," I said. "Sometimes for 10 hours straight. Sometimes through storms. Sometimes in the dark." "Do you get scared?" I thought about that. "Sometimes. But that's how you know it matters." He didn't ask more after that. He just sat quiet, like he understood something too big to put into words. I didn't tell Heather. I didn't need to. It wasn't for her. Ryan stayed with me 2 nights. We played board games, made French toast, and fell asleep watching old aviation documentaries on YouTube. When I dropped him off Sunday night, he hugged me like he didn't want to let go. And that could have been the end of it. Just a quiet, meaningful memory. But kids don't forget the things that make them feel powerful. And truth has a way of returning louder when the time is right. The invitation came 2 weeks later. Heather texted it like she was running a social media campaign, family BBQ at ours next Saturday. "Bring something yummy. Let's catch up. It's been too long." Sent at 6:02 a.m., as if the earlier the message, the more spontaneous and casual it would seem. I stared at it for a full minute. It wasn't new. Heather had sent dozens of messages like this over the years. Backyard parties, family brunches, just because dinners that always seemed to revolve around her latest renovation reveal or some staged lifestyle milestone. And I usually had an excuse: ready, work, flight, emergency, standby, bad Wi-Fi. All of it true, but also convenient. But this time, I didn't want to say no. Maybe it was Ryan. Maybe it was the way he'd looked at me in that cockpit. Maybe it was the quiet I'd carried since that weekend. A different kind of quiet, the steady one that follows confidence, not shame. So I typed, "I'll be there," and hit send before I could think too hard. A few hours later, another ping. "Yay, bring your fruit salad." People still talk about it. I hadn't made fruit salad in 5 years. No one ever talked about it. But I replied, "Sure." And then came the photo. Heather's backyard transformed like something out of a lifestyle magazine. White draped string lights, curated throw pillows on every chair, a brand new soccer net angled perfectly behind the seating area, like it was part of the decor. It wasn't a family BBQ. It was a production. Saturday arrived hot and cloudless. I parked 2 blocks away like I always did. It was muscle memory by now, showing up without showing off. I wore a simple white linen button-down, tan slacks, hair pulled back, no makeup, no jewelry. I didn't want to give them anything to measure. The backyard was already buzzing with people. Neighbors, distant cousins, some guy I vaguely recognized from high school. A Spotify playlist of bland top 40 remixes dribbled out from Heather's outdoor speakers. She spotted me just as I stepped onto the patio. "Well, look who decided to show up," she sang out, lifting a glass of rosé. "And just in time to help with the corn classic Jordan. Always the reliable one." She handed me a pair of tongs like it was a baton in a race she never let me run. I smiled. Nice to see you too, Heather. She didn't hear me, or maybe she did and just didn't care. I took the tongs. Not to be agreeable, but to observe. The usual choreography played out, Heather holding court, mom and dad nodding and beaming at every mention of her son's soccer camp or her husband's new firm partnership. Her stories stretched and bent, always ending with a chuckle that demanded applause. When I chimed in with a light, "Nice weather today," no one responded. At one point, Heather introduced me to her neighbor, someone named Bethany, I think with a casual laugh. "This is my sister Jordan. She works something with planes, right?" I nodded. "Something like that." Bethany smiled politely, already turning away. Heather turned back to the grill, smug like she'd just refiled me back into the category she preferred. Harmless. Background. Predictable. And I let her, because I knew something she didn't. Ryan was there, sitting cross-legged at the edge of the lawn, his eyes quietly tracking the entire scene. He hadn't said much all afternoon, but I saw the flicker of memory in him. The headset, the cockpit, the silence above the clouds. And I wondered not if, but when that memory would choose to rise again. As the afternoon drifted toward evening, the air grew thicker with laughter and wine. The second round of drinks had begun, the kind of drinks that made people's voices louder and their filters weaker. Heather was in her zone again, seated near the fire pit, one leg elegantly crossed over the other, holding a fresh glass of Pinot Grigio like a scepter. She was surrounded by her usual circle, cousins, neighbors, friends who called her girl, and clutched their pearls at all the right moments. This was her arena, her stage. And right on cue, she leaned forward with that glint in her eye, the one that always meant a story was coming. And not just any story. A Jordan story. You guys remember when Jordan got lost in that grocery store for like an hour? She began grinning at Aunt Carol. She cried so hard the manager gave her a free lollipop just to shut her up. And she was what, like 8? A few chuckles. Uncle Tom laughed too loudly. Someone muttered, "Oh, poor thing." I stared at my half-full water cup. The reflection of the overhead lights trembled slightly from the wind. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I just waited. But Heather wasn't done. Oh? Or how about that science fair where she totally froze on stage and just stood there, staring at the judges like a deer in headlights? I had to come rescue her. More laughter. Some polite, some awkward, all familiar. I felt my shoulders instinctively tighten, like my body remembered how to shrink even when I didn't want it to. And then, a shift. Ryan stood up from where he'd been sitting on the lawn, a now stickless popsicle in one hand, stained lips pressed together. He walked over slowly, quietly, not demanding attention. "Mom," he said, voice steady. Heather turned mid-sip, startled. "What, baby?" He looked at her, confused. "Why are you making fun of Aunt Jordan?" The table stiffened. Even the wine glasses seemed to pause. Heather blinked, caught off guard. "I'm not, sweetie. We're just telling funny stories. It's all in good fun." But Ryan didn't smile. He turned to look at me, then back at her. "She flies the jet." The words didn't echo. They detonated. Silence fell. Not the casual kind, but the thick kind. The kind that drapes over people and makes them put their drinks down without realizing it. The kind that steals laughter right out of the air. Heather's face froze. Her smile twitched, then collapsed into something that looked like disbelief. What one of the cousins asked, half laughing like they weren't sure if it was a joke. Ryan nodded like it was obvious. "She took me to her airport. I sat in the seat with all the buttons. She wears the headset and everything. She flies people around the world. She's a pilot." Heather opened her mouth, then closed it. My dad's head turned slowly toward me. My mom blinked, furrowed her brows like someone had just spoken in a language she hadn't heard in years. And I didn't say a word. Didn't confirm, didn't deny. Just let it land. Let it hover. Let it settle across the table like a truth too heavy to swat away. Because sometimes it doesn't take a confrontation. Sometimes it just takes a child saying what no adult ever bothered to see. No one knew what to say. Not right away, at least. It was like someone had suddenly turned the music off, but the air was still vibrating with the last note. Forks hovered. Glasses dangled inches from lips. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the Bluetooth speaker glitched out and skipped a beat before quietly humming into silence. Heather just stared. She looked at Ryan like he'd betrayed her, like he'd cracked the porcelain mask she'd spent her entire life polishing. My mother was the first to try to reclaim the moment. She set her wine down, carefully cleared her throat, and attempted a gentle smile. "Honey, I didn't know you were flying those kinds of planes." I met her eyes, softly but without flinching. "You never asked what kind of planes." My dad gave one of his dry chuckles, the kind he uses when he's trying to lighten a moment that doesn't want to be lightened. "Well, guess you've been full of surprises, huh?" I tilted my head. "No," I said. "You've just been full of assumptions." The table shifted. Someone coughed. Someone else muttered something about needing another drink. A third person got up to check on the kids, even though the kids were in plain sight. Aunt Carol offered a too bright smile. "Well, I think it's wonderful. I mean, wow. Not many people do what you do, right?" There was a scattered chorus of awkward murmurs. Not quite agreement, not quite admiration. More like verbal wallpaper meant to cover up the cracks without fixing the wall. But no one met my eyes. Because to look at me now, to really look, meant facing all the years they hadn't. And they weren't ready for that. Not in the middle of a barbecue with tiki torches and potato salad. I didn't feel angry. Strangely, I felt calm. Like the kind of calm that settles into your bones when you're at 35,000 feet and the cockpit is steady. No turbulence, no alarms. Just smooth sky and silence that you choose. That's what this moment was mine. Not stolen, not shouted, just owned. And then I felt a small hand slide into mine. Ryan. He stood beside me, head tilted slightly like he was still trying to figure out the weight of what had just happened. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His presence said enough. He was steady. And in that moment, I realized something profound. I hadn't come to that party for revenge, or recognition, or even closure. I'd come for this. For the small, unplanned, honest moment where the truth finally outran the noise. I glanced across the table and caught Heather's gaze. For the first time in my life, she looked smaller than me. Not physically, but in the way her eyes flickered, not with superiority, but with something closer to fear. Or embarrassment. Or just the unsettling shock of realizing she didn't know the script anymore. Her voice came out softer than I'd ever heard it. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I looked at her, considered a dozen different responses, but the only one that felt true, because you never made space to listen. I let the words hang there. No one tried to laugh them off. Not this time. Not even her. I stood up slowly, brushing invisible wrinkles from the front of my shirt, not because it was wrinkled, but because I needed something to do with my hands. The silence behind me wasn't heavy anymore. It was earned. Ryan looked up at me, eyes wide, searching. "Are you leaving?" I crouched down a little, just enough so only he could hear me. "I think I've been here long enough." His shoulders drooped. "Will you come back?" I smiled. "That depends." "You still want to learn what all the switches do?" His face lit up instantly. "Yeah." "Then maybe," I said, "one day." I ruffled his hair gently, then turned toward the gate. No one tried to stop me. No panicked apologies. No attempts to salvage the narrative. No one ran after me saying, "Wait, tell us more." They just watched. And honestly, I preferred it that way. Because the truth is, you don't need an audience when you finally step into your own story. You just need the courage to walk out of someone else's version of you. The night air felt cooler as I passed the hedge and stepped onto the sidewalk. It smelled faintly of barbecue smoke and citronella candles and something else. Something like freedom. I didn't look back. Not once. Because I knew what I would have seen: a backyard full of people pretending to move on, sipping drinks, and awkwardly restarting their conversations, desperately trying to glue together the version of reality they were more comfortable with. But the crack had already formed. They'd heard it, seen it, felt it. A shift in the family axis, subtle but irreversible. And I didn't need to do anything more. The next morning, I was at 37,000 feet over the Atlantic, wrapped in the kind of silence I chose. No one here asked, "What do you do again?" No one here laughed at a version of me they'd created and repeated until it stuck. The passengers on board didn't know, my family didn't know my history, didn't know the way I used to shrink to make others comfortable. All they knew was I was the one flying the plane. The one guiding them through clouds and turbulence, the one they trusted without needing to know my childhood nickname or how many times I'd been left out of group photos. And that trust, it was enough. More than enough. Because up here there were no birthday dinners, no backhanded compliments, no spotlight-hogging sisters. Up here there was only altitude, calm, control. I leaned back slightly, fingers resting steady on the throttle, and exhaled. Then I thought about Heather, about her face when Ryan said it out loud. She flies the jet. Not she used to, not she wants to, not she's trying to. Present tense. She does. And for once they didn't have a comeback. They didn't minimize it. They didn't turn it into a joke. They didn't laugh it off with another childhood story. Because the story had already changed. They just hadn't realized I'd been writing it all along. Flying has a rhythm. There's a point somewhere around cruising altitude where everything just settles. The instruments level out, the engine hum becomes background music, and for a few minutes or sometimes hours you're simply there, suspended between what's behind and what's ahead, between gravity and possibility. That's where I was the morning after the barbecue, 37,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean heading west. The sun had just started climbing over the curve of the Earth, casting a wash of pale gold across the cockpit. My co-pilot Jason sipped his coffee beside me, quiet, respectful, professional. He didn't ask personal questions. He didn't need to. Up here, our job was clear. Keep everyone safe, stay focused, land clean. And I did, every time. But my mind still drifted back to that backyard, to the way Heather had looked at me for the first time, not with superiority, but with something close to uncertainty. Like I had shape-shifted right in front of her. Like she didn't know what story to tell anymore, because I had taken the pen out of her hand. It made me wonder what kind of family sits across from you for decades and never once asks, "What are you proud of? What lights you up? What do you do when no one is watching?" I didn't think they were cruel, at least not intentionally. They were just so busy filling every space with their voices they never noticed mine was missing. But Ryan had. A 10-year-old boy raised in the same environment had somehow learned to see, to ask questions, to listen. And that was what stayed with me the most. Not the silence after his declaration, not the awkward glances, not the fumbling recovery from Heather. It was the look in his eyes, unapologetic, proud, like he hadn't done something brave, just something right. He hadn't said it to defend me. He said it because in his world it was just a fact. I fly the jet. It made me think maybe the story isn't just about me. Maybe it's about how we raise the next generation. Do we teach them to look past quiet people? Or do we teach them that still waters hold depth? That people don't have to shout to matter? That power can be quiet. And that silence, chosen not imposed, is strength. I looked over at Jason. "Level at FL 370, I said, adjusting the heading knob slightly. He nodded, eyes on the radar. "Wind's calm. Smooth right ahead." "Good." I leaned back, letting my fingers rest on the controls. This was where I belonged. Not in folding chairs beside picnic tables. Not as the butt of someone else's story. Not as the forgotten sister. But here, at the helm, invisible to most, essential to many, unapologetically, unquestionably me. 2 days after the barbecue, I got a text from Heather. Just one sentence. "Did you really take Ryan to your airport?" No emojis, no exclamation marks, no condescending tone laced with passive-aggressive sweetness. Just curiosity. Or maybe suspicion. I stared at the screen for a while before locking the phone and tossing it onto the couch. I didn't owe her a response. Not anymore. But still something about the message lingered. Not because of what it asked, but because of what it didn't ask. She hadn't asked where I flew to, or what my rank was, or how long I'd been doing it. She didn't ask if I liked it or if I was proud. She asked about the airport as if my story was still just a location on a map she didn't care to visit. It reminded me why I'd stopped volunteering parts of myself to people who only wanted them to fit a narrative they'd already decided on. Instead of replying, I opened my email and read over my next flight itinerary. This one was a long-haul New York to Cape Town. One of my favorites. 12.5 hours in the air, mostly at night. The kind of flight that required focused patience and a quiet sort of stamina. The kind of flight I'd learned to love. I started prepping my travel bag, passport, flight binder, 2 pressed uniforms, my leather headset case. I didn't keep framed certificates in my home. No plaques on the wall. No trophies. No spotlight. But in that bag, that was my life's work. My story. Everything they never asked about, packed neatly between checklists and navigation logs. Before heading out, I checked my mail. Bills, catalogs, a birthday card from an old friend. And then one envelope small with Ryan's handwriting. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single drawing. Crayon, of course. The colors were uneven, the lines a little shaky, but unmistakable. It was a plane, a jet, with the name Captain Jordan scribbled across the side. Next to it was a stick figure in a pilot hat and a small speech bubble that read, "She flies the jet." I sat on the edge of my bed holding that drawing like it was something sacred, because it wasn't just a picture, it was proof. That someone saw me. That the next generation might not make the same mistakes as the last. That my silence hadn't gone unnoticed after all. Not by the one who mattered. I folded the drawing carefully and slid it into the front pocket of my flight binder. Not to show off, not for legacy, just to carry it with me. As a reminder that sometimes your story finds a voice in the most unexpected people. And sometimes it only takes one honest sentence from a child to rewrite an entire family narrative. She flies the jet. That was all it took. Not a speech, not a confrontation, just truth, simply said, clearly said, without apology. And for the first time in my life, it was enough. A week later, I was wheels down in Johannesburg, the early morning sun bleeding gold across the tarmac as we taxied to the gate. After 12 hours in the air, most people would be running on fumes. But me, I was steady. There's something about flying through darkness and arriving in light that leaves you quietly fulfilled. I powered down the systems, ran through post-flight checklists, and handed off the controls to ground crew. My co-pilot gave me a respectful nod, no words needed. We were professionals. A clean flight is its own reward. Back in my hotel room, I poured myself a glass of water and sat on the edge of the window watching the city wake up. Down below, cars began filling the streets. People on balconies stretched, drank coffee, started their routines, all of them with live stories, layers, and none of them knew who I was. And that felt right. Because I had learned something crucial in the years I spent being invisible. You don't need recognition to be real. You don't need applause to have purpose. And you sure as hell don't need your story to be understood by the very people who refused to read it. For most of my life, I thought being loved meant being seen. But that day at the barbecue, when Ryan's voice rose into the air and cracked open the sky, I realized something else. Being seen isn't always about being center stage. Sometimes it's about being truly witnessed. Even if only by one person. That's what Ryan had done. He saw me. Not as the sister his mom joked about. Not as the background. But as me. Fully formed. Unshrinkable. And that changed everything. That kind of visibility. It doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs truth. I pulled his drawing from the flight binder again, smoothing the creases. His crayon plane flying strong and lopsided across a page too small to contain the sky. And that simple line, "She flies the jet." I thought of Heather again, of course. Not with bitterness, just curiosity. What would she do with this new version of me, the one she couldn't reduce to childhood mishaps or sisterly punchlines? Would she ignore it? Try to fold it into her narrative? Or maybe, for the first time, listen? I didn't know. And honestly, it wasn't my job to figure it out anymore. Because for the first time, my story wasn't about her. It never had been. It had always been about the girl who used to shrink when others spoke, and who learned slowly and quietly to take up space in a world that didn't offer it freely. And now I had more than space. I had altitude. I had direction. I had purpose. And I had peace. In the hotel's silence, with morning light stretching across the floor, I finally breathed the kind of breath that doesn't carry any weight. Not from the past. Not from expectation. Not from anyone else's version of who I was supposed to be. It was just mine. And it was enough. It was a few days later, back in the States, when I received the group text. Heather again. Thinking of planning a fall family retreat in Vermont, cabins, s'mores, and some real bonding time. Who's in? I stared at the message for a moment, watching the 3 bouncing dots appear as someone else started typing a reply. Probably Mom. Maybe Aunt Carol. Always the first to jump in to make it seem like the family was tighter than it actually was. The curated version of us, like Heather's Instagram, all filters and festive fonts. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry. I just didn't need to. Heather followed up individually an hour later. You could come this time, you know. Ryan keeps asking. There it was. The one name that could still reach me. The one voice I hadn't built defenses against. And suddenly I could see him again, legs swinging from a picnic bench, eyes full of light, saying, "She flies the jet." Not as a defense, not as a bombshell, but as a simple truth. I didn't answer right away. I went about my day, checking in with the charter company, reviewing my schedule, doing groceries like a regular person who didn't spend half her life thousands of feet in the sky. But the message stayed with me, pulsing quietly in the back of my mind. I wasn't sure if Heather was trying to make peace or reclaim control. But that wasn't really the point anymore. The difference now, I had a choice. I could attend or not attend. I could speak or stay silent. And either way, I knew exactly who I was. That kind of internal compass, once you find it, isn't something anyone else can steer. Later that evening, I sent a simple text back. If I'm not flying that weekend, I'll think about it. No emoji, no apology, no over-explaining, just boundaries. And it felt good. I didn't feel guilty for protecting my peace. I didn't feel the need to shrink just to make Heather more comfortable. I didn't feel responsible for making the room easier for anyone else. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't orbiting their world anymore. I had my own. And in it, my truth didn't require permission to exist. That's the thing they don't tell you about reclaiming your narrative. It's not loud. It's not some grand declaration. Sometimes it's just a quiet decision, a private line you draw that says, "This is who I am." And I'm not explaining it to people who've already decided not to listen. I looked out the window at the fading evening sky. Somewhere out there, someone was boarding a flight, buckling into a seat, trusting a stranger to carry them through clouds and into dawn. And sometimes, that stranger is someone like me. Someone they'll never know, never thank, never truly see. And that's okay, because I know. And that's more than enough. A month passed. The Vermont trip came and went. I didn't go. Heather didn't follow up. No guilt-tripping, no passive-aggressive texts, no dramatic voice memos filled with sighs and heavily coded words like family and disappointing. And that silence? It was oddly respectful. Or maybe careful. Like she didn't know how to navigate the new version of me, the one who didn't flinch when ignored or shrink when overlooked. The version of me that walked away and didn't look back. But Ryan did text me. A photo this time. It was him in a Halloween costume, a pilot obviously. Aviator sunglasses, a jacket 2 sizes too big, and a plastic headset slanted across his head. The message said, "I'm flying to the moon. Wanna come?" It made me laugh out loud. I replied, only if you let me co-pilot. He sent back a thumbs-up emoji and a rocket ship. That little boy had no idea how much he'd changed the air that day. Not just around me, but inside me. He didn't understand legacy or trauma or the long echo of being forgotten by the people who were supposed to know you best. But he felt the truth. And more importantly, he said it. I realized then that I'd spent years trying to prove I mattered to people who were committed to misunderstanding me. But Ryan, he just got it. And maybe that's what healing looks like, not some sweeping reconciliation where violins play and tears are shed in slow motion, but a quiet moment where someone sees you fully without performance or permission. I hadn't responded to Heather's fall retreat, but when Thanksgiving rolled around, I got another message. Not from her, from Ryan. If you come, can we make pancakes again? Simple, unassuming, free of all the weight and subtext the adults always carried. I hesitated, then smiled. You bring the syrup, I'll bring the altitude. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel conflicted about showing up. Because now I wasn't showing up to prove anything. I was showing up for someone who already knew. Someone who didn't care about the stories others told about me. Someone who didn't need a title or a certificate or an Instagram bio to believe I was capable. He just looked at me and saw flight. And in that space I could finally land. Not to stay, not to belong, but to offer something better, presence. My terms, my story, my sky. Thanksgiving came with its usual chaos, loud voices, clinking dishes, and a kitchen that somehow always felt too small for the number of people crammed into it. I arrived early not to help, but because I wanted a few quiet moments with Ryan before the house filled with noise. He greeted me at the door wearing the same pilot costume he'd worn for Halloween, only this time with a real aviation pin clipped to his jacket. I'm ready for takeoff, he said proudly. I laughed and knelt down to adjust his crooked headset. Co-pilot reporting for duty. He led me to the kitchen like we were preparing for flight, pointing to a stack of mixing bowls and announcing mission pancakes. Heather walked past us without saying much, just a short nod, her lips pressed together in a polite line. She didn't mention Vermont, didn't bring up the barbecue, and neither did I. We were something else now. Not closer, but clearer. Throughout the day, the usual stories began to circulate. Uncle Tom retold the one about his fishing trip that no one had asked to hear. Aunt Valerie praised Heather's cranberry glaze like it was the culinary invention of the decade. Mom hovered like she always did, directing people as though she were stage managing a Broadway show. But for the first time, I didn't feel outside of it. I wasn't performing, but I wasn't invisible either. Ryan made sure of that. Everywhere he went, he dragged me along, showing me his drawings, insisting I sit beside him during dinner, asking me which airplane I'd flown last week, and whether it had cool wings or just normal ones. And slowly people started to notice. Mom leaned over at one point and said, "He really loves being around you, huh?" I nodded. "Yeah, I like being around him too." She looked at me a moment longer than usual, like she was trying to see something she hadn't before. And maybe she did. After dinner, Heather and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen rinsing dishes in silence. It wasn't awkward, just quiet. Finally, she said, "He really looks up to you." I paused. "I know." She nodded, still not looking at me. That day, at the barbecue, I didn't mean to. "It's okay," I cut in gently, drying a plate. "You didn't know." She hesitated. "I should've." I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because sometimes silence isn't avoidance, it's understanding. And this time, it said more than any apology could. As I gathered my things to leave, Ryan ran up and handed me a folded piece of paper. "For your flight tonight," he said. It was another drawing. A jet soaring above a mountain range, 2 stick figures in the cockpit. The speech bubble read, "We fly together." I smiled. "Co-pilot," I whispered, tapping his shoulder. "Best one I've ever had." He hugged me tight and I held on just a second longer. When I stepped out into the cold November night, the air felt crisp, not like the end of something, but like a beginning. Because now I wasn't carrying the weight of being unseen. I was carrying something lighter. Truth, connection, and a future where even if I flew solo, I'd never really be alone. There's something about altitude that puts everything into perspective. Up there, above the noise, the gossip, the misunderstandings, you realize how small certain things are, like needing to be the center of attention, like needing to be right, like waiting for people to clap for a version of you they never cared to understand in the first place. For a long time, I thought silence meant weakness, that being quiet made me invisible, replaceable, forgettable. But what I've learned, what flying taught me, is that silence can be powerful when it's chosen, when it's no longer about shrinking but about grounding. Because not everyone deserves to hear your story. Not everyone earns access to who you've become. And that's okay. You don't need an audience to be real. You don't need validation to be valuable. Sometimes all you need is one person, one honest voice to reflect back your truth. And sometimes that voice comes from a 10-year-old with a paper headset and crayons who looks at you like you already have wings. So here's what I know now. You don't have to force people to see you. You don't have to shout your worth. You just have to keep becoming quietly, consistently, fully. Because the people who matter, they won't need a spotlight to find you. They'll just know. And when they say it simply, clearly, without a hint of doubt, it won't sound like praise. It'll sound like something far better. Recognition. She flies the jet, and that will be more than enough.